Well, since we saw you last, it's been pretty busy, to be honest. We were here to around 6 o'clock last night, mostly because the venue nearly kicked us out last night. So something we'll need to discuss today.
Just before we start though, when we have lunch, because this was one of the issues with the venue, you just need to stay on this. You see outside there's a green grassed area, and then there's a loop road that goes around. On the other side of that road is the golf course. So yesterday some people were sitting on the other side of the road and there was a complaint made that you can't be on the golf course. So just in this grassy area next to the room is fine, but no further than that, please. Yeah. Yep.
And they actually said you could take chairs out if you want to just sit
out here.
Or
put something on the grass, like a blanket or something. Yeah.
Just if you can remember, if you do take chairs out, to bring them back and put them back in the same position if you can. Because it just, with the way we've positioned it, is try to give all of you the best view.
Yes.
If you can notice that.
Yeah. If you take them from the back row, actually, that's the best.
Because the reality is most of you will fit in the back row could be just taken. And there's chairs on the side, 4 or 5 or 6 on the side as well. Extras. So if you want to have a chair.
Yes.
Yeah. So that was one of the issues, which some golfers obviously got upset about.
Yes.
The other one was a more important issue, and that was the unattended children yesterday. And this is something Mary and I have given clear instructions about at the beginning of you'll notice in all of the we say that parents must supervise their children 100% of the time, and the children were left unsupervised. And because of that, the venue almost cancelled our entire booking last night. Yeah.
They take it seriously, which we do understand at home. On our properties, we take that very seriously. Children.
Yeah, and the sad thing is Mary also mentioned to the couple in question
at lunchtime
about it, and they sort of dismissed it after that as well. So we've had to email them about that and to have not their children be brought today.
Yeah. Obviously, there's tractors and golfers and golf balls and all kinds of things out there.
Yeah.
So, and we were not aware that the kids were not supervised in the second half.
Yeah.
I was aware they were too noisy, and I nearly stopped the proceedings to sort of address that. But I thought that they were just here with a parent. So
yeah. It's hard for us while we're talking to keep an eye on
everything.
Yeah. That's why we have usually at home we have a little team that keeps an eye on everything for us. But just generally speaking, the instructions that we give in all of the faceplates of all of our events that you look on whatever event booking system we use, they are there for good reason. And some of those good reasons are that if we don't follow them, some of the venues will get so upset with us that they'll kick you out straight away. And yesterday there was another trigger for the venue, and that was that they were already getting media complaints about us as well. So because of the media complaints coming to them as well as there being some problems, naturally that increases their feeling like, oh, we've got to get rid of these people.
We're not sure if we like having these people here. Yeah.
So that's a lot of you at this stage don't understand and this applies to everyone who listens to Divine Truth actually. A lot of you don't understand the amount of stuff that comes at Mary and I. And so you think that, I'm just doing a little thing or I'm just doing a little thing there, but it all reflects, we are blamed for your little things you do in almost every case. And so that just adds to the difficulties of sharing truth when we're not responsible for what you do, obviously, but we are, the blame of what you do is attached to us rather than to you. So when you act unlovingly, particularly in relationships or friendships or with family or any of these other things, every time you act unlovingly, your family doesn't blame you for it, or your friends don't blame you for it. They blame our teachings for it. Does that make sense to you? And this is why when you apply our teachings in a selfish manner or out of harmony with love, then obviously it's going to have a negative impact on how God's truth is perceived on earth. And this is the goal of many spirits around us at the moment, is the goal is that somebody does something severe enough for it to go around the whole world in terms of this is what that cult did, or this is what all Miller's fault is what they call me, and that, of course, is the primary purpose of that is to discredit what we're teaching, and the spirits behind all of this are trying to they don't want us to get any traction with what we're actually teaching, because if the average person listened to what we're teaching, they would think it's pretty logical, right? So all they want to do is have some kind of inflammation that occurs, so they inflame a situation as much as they're able, so that then more people don't listen is the goal. And this is the kind of thing that happens very constantly. And it's interesting, it's happened in Ireland as well. And partly that's because many of you Irish are very passive in the way that you handle conflict. And so this is demonstrating to you that at some point in your future, you're going to have to be more active in dealing with things rather than passive. And that many of you are scared of doing, right? You're frightened of doing that. And so you're trying to maintain your life living God's way in private, if you like. But a person who lives their life in harmony with God's way eventually can't be private. And that's something you've got to, at some point, accept. You know? And that's why for many times Mary and I bear the consequence of your poor decisions. Does that make sense? And we often get emails from family members and friends and criticising us when you've made a poor decision. Of course, most of the time we ignore those emails because we don't have enough time, to respond to emails generally anyway. Our life isn't spent in front of a computer, and we have no intention of our life in the future being spent in front of a computer either. But, at the end of the day, in their mind, the people who are emailing us, we are the ones to blame for your behaviour, right? And this is a way that most people don't realise they can listen to divine truth, apply it in a very selfish manner rather than looking at it from a perspective of love, and then the net result becomes that we get blamed for your behaviour. Yeah. And of course the spirits want somebody to do, and some things we've noticed, like in different cases where some things that we've noticed happening, we've had to even speak to people about, because the thing is headed to be a thing that's so bad and extreme that it was going to lead to these things happening in their life, where they became a key instrument in the world's media being able to criticise divine truth more than they already are. And so sometimes we have said that to the people involved, and that's caused them to pause a little. But we can't do that. The more people who listen to divine truth, we can't do that. We're very dependent, actually, or reliant, if you like, on you treating things with ethics and morality in your day-to-day life.
Excuse me, I'm just going to shut the door.
Sure. So today we may have a few media people turn up as well, I must say, because another thing we had to deal with last night is that there were some media accusations made. Some of your family members, one of them has, as a concerned citizen, has contacted the media about and started sort of falsely accusing us of many things we don't do. And as a result, that media people contacted us. I think it was the Irish Independent.
Yeah.
They contacted us. And of course, once one media person starts...
A couple did, actually.
We usually, over the next 3 or 4 days or a week or so, end up with 10 or 20 or 100, depending on whether Reuters gets hold of it as well. So we'll just have to see what happens over the next few days. But there might be times during this session and tomorrow's where we have to stop the session just to deal with them and ask them to leave. We've invited some to come, but they are under strict instructions that they can't interfere with our presentation or distract you in the presentation or film you in the presentation. They can film us, but not you. And also not, be disruptive. And if they are any of those things, then we're going to ask them to leave. And there's only 2 places that have asked us at this point, and we don't know whether they will or not come. So we'll just see what happens. Make sense? Now, I know for many of you this makes you uncomfortable as well, yeah, and many of you are trying to hide in the shadows, right? And then being on a media presentation just because you attended one of our events is pretty tricky. I understand that, and you know, sorry.
Sorry, Your Honour.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, yeah. So we understand also the pressure you guys are under, even by yourselves, in terms of this negative spirit influence trying to influence you negatively. Once you hear divine truth, there is a lot of pressure that's brought to bear, and this is one of the things we would like to discuss with you tomorrow, so we can help you out with that a bit. Because this is something we also notice is that oftentimes we set up an event, we have 100 people booked, but 30 or so don't come, and most of them don't come for all sorts of reasons relating to the pressure they feel under. And I don't know if many of you notice, but as soon as you book and you get closer to the event and closer to the event, the pressure ramps up, and the pressure ramps up, the family starts getting involved and friends start getting involved and criticism starts happening, and then you feel the spirit, the pressure as well. And for most people, feeling the combination of those things is enough for them to say, I don't want to do that. Make sense? Yeah. You want to ask Gary? Just if you use a mic.
I just know from the past that you filmed the audience in your videos, and now you don't. I just wanted to know why.
The main reason why we don't do the audience in the videos anymore is because we've had a lot of trouble with people in the audience, even though they've agreed to be filmed when they come, and their attendance is an agreement of them being filmed, and we still have that clause with all of our events. But we've had many takedown notices issued on all of our videos, and I have to go through many hours and hours of back and forward with either YouTube or another organisations to justify the fact that the person agreed to be there, and it just wastes so much of my time. So for that reason, we are less inclined, for the moment anyway. Once we have our own hosting site, that will change, because obviously nobody can really issue a takedown notice on our own site. And the other thing we may have to change in the future is actually having you make a written agreement with us that you are willing to do that. But if you think of all the paperwork involved, it's a huge amount. You just think for 50 people paperwork, it's like every event, 50 people have to say, I attended the event and I allow you to use my image and my voice and all that kind of stuff. And we have that implied on our website, obviously, which is our agreement with you. But unfortunately, a lot of people after the fact don't honour that agreement. And so what they do is they then go, we want to issue takedown notices on the whole event. They don't just want...
they want their face taken out. It's very hard to do.
Very hard to do, but also they actually do, YouTube does issue a takedown notice on the whole event, not just
the section
they're in.
Yeah.
And this becomes very problematic for us in terms of time and management of our time and so forth. Because if I spend all my time arguing with YouTube about every individual person who issues a takedown notice on our site, then at the end of the day, my whole life will be spent doing that, and I won't get anything done. Yeah. So that's the main reason why. It's just sort of an economy.
Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. We should say we're actually not filming this event, actually. It's just private individuals.
Yeah, normally in events at home, we would film them. I'm going to misspeak a lot today because I only had 3 hours sleep last night.
I had a big sleep and poor Jesus didn't have a sleep.
I got attacked by spirits all night last night, so I only had 3 hours sleep.
Before.
So I'm a bit sort of like on the... and given the net accrual of sleepless nights I've had on this trip, I'm still pretty tired. But at home what we do is we generally want to film the event because we want to provide a lot of things we speak of. It's good if we don't have to repeat ourselves over and over again, but we love the interaction with you guys. The personal interaction is always better than watching a video. Yeah. So we want the personal interaction with people, but it's also handy to actually have a video because then you can refer to that later. And So at this stage, we're focused on audio only for the moment, because we can't afford to have a team of people with videoing everywhere we go. Obviously, it's already very costly for us to travel. And so what we're trying to do is try to minimise that travel in the future as much as we're able to try and we're trying to sort out a number of things about how to make that more economical as well. But we do love the personal interaction. We want to have that with you. So we don't see our future as being sort of at home doing just, what do they call it, video streaming or something from home, and then people, interacting us from home. We don't see that as our future, because for most times it's the personal interaction that has the most benefit with the person. So that's why we want the personal interactions. And when we talk tomorrow, we'll talk more about our plans. Some of you, if you've watched other videos, you've probably heard some of our plans for the future and stuff. And we're happy to answer any questions from you as a group about that tomorrow. But, for us, our main focus at this stage is sharing the information somehow. And we're trying to work out, if it's just myself and Mary, what do we do? So at the moment, our schedule is we obviously, on an event like this, what we do is we usually set up the day before, if we can, because if something goes wrong with the system and I've got to reprogram everything for the new frequencies of a location, then it can often take anywhere up to 4 hours to do that. And so sometimes we prefer to set up the day before. Then, of course, we do a whole heap of prep in terms of the event itself for Mary and I, in terms of what we just discuss with our spirit friends what we're going to talk about, how we're going to proceed with the group. We get our spirit friends' assessment of your feelings and emotions as well as a part of it, the general spirit in the group. And then we assess that as a part of what we finish up discussing with, in terms of subjects we end up discussing with you. And then what we do on the morning is we generally get up, do all our prep, make our lunch and everything, and then we come here usually an hour or so before. This morning it was about an hour and a half before, and then we make sure everything's recording, and we're getting double recordings of everything, and then we go through, do the presentation, obviously to around 4 o'clock or so. So we're on the average, on most days we're doing 5 hours presentation. Some days on this trip have been up to 8 hours, but usually, we try to limit it to 5. 8 is only if we're feeling especially energetic, and we feel the audience is especially responsive. And then what we have to do is we go home. Mary makes dinner while I unravel all the audio and get all the audio. I fix up all the audio, because all the audio records at levels that I've got to change. I fix up all the audio and back it all up 3 times, and then I upload it to a off-site backup, so that the videographers, who are people who might be videoing the event, can actually download that audio and use it in their video if they want. Now that usually takes us until usually 7 or 7:30 at night. Then we have dinner, then we go for a walk, and then we go to bed. And that's our day, like every day, pretty much, except for the one off day we have, and the travel days, of course, that we have when we're traveling. So it's a pretty heavy schedule. And when things get more problematic, where an event says, a venue says, we want to cancel on you or something like that, then of course that just adds far more problems to our workload. We go, well, can we even have an event now? Is there an alternative site we can go to that's in the local area where everybody's already coming? And so there's a lot of issues that then come up as soon as somebody starts to look at cancelling an event. So, this is the workload we have generally, and that's without us doing any more than that. You can see it's already quite a lot, right? And so a lot of people will say, why aren't you doing this and why aren't you doing that? The main answer to those questions is we don't have time. That's the first one. Second answer to the question is we also need some time to progress ourselves. We want some time together and time to progress. On our trips, a lot of our life suffers, our physical
Yes. I feel a
bodies
bit
suffer a
unhealthy at
bit.
the
We
moment.
feel,
Yeah.
normally Mary and I would be exercising every day, and we'd walk 6 to 8 kilometres every day. And both of us would do a bit of weights 2 or 3 times a week as well, just to keep the muscle movement going. And when we're on a trip, of course, we can't do a lot of that. And so that's why we try to get a walk in the evening. So it's quite hard to do a trip where you're constantly on the move, constantly changing locations. And that's one reason why we probably are going to be more, in the future, we're probably going to sort of centralise on one location for maybe 4 to 6 weeks at a time instead of
4 locations in 4 weeks.
Yeah, so instead of 4 locations in 4 weeks, because that's a very stressful sort of a program with all the other things we're also trying to do. Now, of course, if we had a team that we could have come with us, then they could video and audio, and we wouldn't have to worry about all that. So that would save. But honestly, it's so expensive to have a team, because you've got to hire a house for the team, and you've got to get vehicles for the team, van for the team, and you've got all the equipment the team would have, which can be anywhere up to a ton of equipment. So you need a van big enough to carry all that equipment and the people. And then, of course, they've got to have good internet connection and other things in order to do all these things. And so you can see that it's going to be a long time, I feel, in the future before we will have any of that happening. So it's just going to be probably Mary and I for a while yet, for at least the next 5 to 10 years, I'd suggest. And then we'll see what happens after that. But at the moment, our main goal is just to keep sharing truth and keep having the personal interactions with you.
Yeah.
Yep, so...
Brian, at the back there. Am I... I can't hear myself.
You can't hear yourself?
Yep. Can you guys hear me? Yeah.
I can hear.
Good.
Yep.
I just have a feeling that family member might have been my dad.
Might have been.
Yeah.
And I have a lot of fear coming up around that.
Yeah.
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 I know I probably shouldn't take responsibility for that, but...
No, why?
No, it's not. You didn't...
It's not your problem. If it is your dad, it's your father's problem, not yours.
Yeah.
So you don't need to take responsibility for what other people do. And in fact, this is a very important thing about free will. They're allowed to do what they want to do.
Yeah.
It's just important for any of you to be aware that when your family members are doing this, obviously there's a conversation to be had with them at some point regarding their behaviour as to why they're making claims they don't know anything about if they haven't personally investigated things themselves. So one of the things we said to the media, in fact, we might just grab the phone. Your phone, is your phone around somewhere? The media asked us...
yes, I'm recording, aren't I?
They made a lot of accusations and asked us to comment.
Well, and we don't have time to give a lengthy comment, really.
Yeah,
at 8 o'clock
not with
at
the
night.
schedule we've got.
Do you want me to read what I said?
Yeah,
or
just what they said and what we said in return.
Good afternoon. In the run-up to the Divine Truth event in Kildare, can I please
No, that's the
ask you
second
to...
one.
Oh, yeah, that's
Yeah,
the second.
we want the first one.
I'm a journalist with the Irish Independent. I have been contacted by a concerned citizen regarding the event you're hosting in Ireland this weekend. It is alleged that Divine Truth teachings, which claim to transform the soul into a state of at-one-ment with God, have drawn
True, that's true. I like that.
have drawn significant controversy and have been labelled by critics as destructive and cult-like. It is claimed these teachings often push followers into highly emotional states, which Miller claims are necessary for spiritual progress. Critics have warned of the potential for harm and the coercive control exhibited within the movement.
Coercive control. Yeah.
Tickets to attend your events are free, but the organisation has asked followers to donate to their cause and help pay for their travel and accommodation during the tour. Which we did. We did that.
Yeah.
Would you like to respond to any of the issues raised above? My deadline is 6 p.m.
In other words, she gave us 20-something minutes.
Yeah, she sent it at about 5, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe an hour to respond.
And I said very briefly, because I didn't see it, it was only when we were sitting here waiting for the other people.
Yeah.
Hi, Catherine. The allegations made in your email to me are unfounded and untrue. Obviously I'm referring to the cult thing there. If you are sincerely willing to investigate what is true, you're welcome to attend our event on Saturday and or Sunday, as long as you are not disruptive or disrespectful. If you publish without this is Mary. If you publish without investigation, then you join the ranks of many media organisations and their employees who have purposefully fabricated and published lies about us. We hope your sincerity draws you to investigate the truth. With regards, Mary.
Which she didn't do.
No.
She published anyway.
And then
6 o'clock last night.
yeah. And she had more in there. And she just had a lot of innuendo about us extorting money from you.
Yeah, not
Basically,
stuff
it was
that
about
you could
money.
sue them for, but stuff
No.
that was just sort of innuendo.
It wasn't
not that we would sue
untrue
anybody,
anything.
but
She's about us having coercive control of you. Obviously, that's untrue. But
yeah.
And then on the heels of that, just straight after I think it published, I had another one. In the run-up to the Divine Truth event in Kildare, can I please ask you to respond to claims that your religious group is a cult which preys on vulnerable people? No.
Not a religion, not a cult. And
that's exactly
do you all
what I
feel
wrote
like
back.
you're very vulnerable? I don't feel
I get a bit indignant on your behalf. I'm like, these people are pretty awesome
Yeah.
people. But
the media is amazing, really. It's an amazing machine of evil, really, for the most part. Yeah.
So I haven't got my response because I think I did it in office. But I just said we're not a religion and we're not a cult and we don't.
And there's no vulnerable people coming along to our groups generally.
Yeah. I said we.
And if there was, they would not be harmed anyway.
Yeah, no, I didn't say anything.
No, but that's what I'd say.
I said we do talk about God, love, truth, and we emphasise with people their loving requirement to take personal responsibility for their lives and their emotions. People do donate to us to fund what we do. Yeah. And then I copied also what I'd written to the other lady to him. So they're both invited to come if they would like to investigate. But obviously the first lady doesn't want to investigate, so the other fellow. I don't think he will.
I don't think he will, but
It would be too much effort.
I think he already feels it's a bit of a storm in a teacup.
Yes, he's not that.
So he's not that committed to investigating further.
I'll just put that back. Yeah. But so you know, that's what happened.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Because if it wasn't for the Jesus claim, you sort of wonder, you wonder how many of these places would get any traction at all, to be honest. That's something I knew at the beginning once I realised and remembered all my life. I go, oh no.
That was your first feeling, wasn't it?
That was one of my first feelings, that I had to address. Because I knew what people would be tempted to do with that information. But it's what I find very sad is that there's so much truth we've shared over years, like hundreds, thousands of hours of truth, all of which, if you wanted to do something in the media, it would actually be a lot better to focus on what we teach, because that would create a major discussion in the worldwide media for years and years and years on different subjects. You know what I mean? So if they actually wanted to, if the media themselves actually wanted to sort of make money off of what we're doing, the best thing to do is actually share what we teach rather than criticise us personally. But the spirits who are behind the media don't want them to do that. They just want them to concentrate on my claim of being Jesus, and that's it. And therefore it's a cult, and therefore it's, and so forth. And the reason for that is it's a great way of stopping people who might otherwise investigate truth from investigating truth. And this brings us, I suppose, to the subject we've been talking about, which is what people do in their beliefs, in their spiritual beliefs, that then cause them to take very, very unloving actions in their own personal lives with regard to fighting a belief that they personally disagree with, without even investigating the belief itself and without even investigating whether it's logically founded or founded on love or truth. And it's a very interesting thing that we do when we do this, because we end up pulling in all of our own history. And for many media people, you can imagine almost every media person we've ever met lies. And almost everyone, aside from just a few, 3 or 4 that I can sort of think of now, that were not outright liars, They withheld a lot of information, withheld a lot of things, which meant that they were still lying, but they didn't say what their purpose was, and they didn't say where they got it from. And even when we asked, they wouldn't share these kinds of things. And all of their producers have lied to us without an exception. All of their producers have lied. And then they want people to tell the truth. And I find this remarkable that they're lying to get the truth. And they don't even think about the hypocrisy of such an act, like of actually lying to somebody so that person tells you the truth. It's just such a hypocritical thing to do. And the sad thing about it is in doing that, there is a large justification in the media nowadays of lying to get a truth, lying to get a truth. And when you think about that, like historically when media organisations got started or journalism got started, there wasn't any courses that taught you what to do or say. It was just people who wanted to investigate the truth of a matter.
Yeah.
That's
And
how
share
it
it.
began. If you think about it, it was quite a high ideal, wasn't it? Like a high principle. Yeah. I want to find the truth of what's happening here. I want to share the truth of what's happening there. And very early days, many of them died for doing that as well, by the way. Many of them had such a passion for truth that they actually died because they shared a truth, and that wasn't, acceptable by the majority or by the people in power. But now the media themselves are the people in power, right? And most of the media people we've met are addicted to power. Yeah. They want power over others. They want the ability to influence the masses in a certain direction, and they're not very concerned about whether it's truthful or not. We had some members of the media right from the beginning of our association with the media who actually stayed in our home, which was a very ordinary 2-bedroom, about a 86 square metre home. And at that stage, we didn't have a studio or any sheds or anything around. It was just a home. And we actually had him come and stay in one of the bedrooms of the home. He was a Uniting Church minister, right, claiming to be a cult investigator. And he stayed with us for 3 days, asking lots of really good questions, none of which he ever talked about with anybody publicly. And in the video presentation, they made claims like he visited us in our compound
and had secret cameras.
And we had secret cameras.
He had secret cameras.
All of his cameras were like right in our face, and he came to a venue, and all of his cameras were like, you can see him in our videos going up and down his secret cameras, and he's saying how we've got barbed wire fences around our house. Now, we have no fences at all around our property, like the outside of our property. He took these pictures of barbed wire actually on the video.
That was the next.
Oh, that was the next group, yeah. But because of his claims, they all did the same thing. And it just went on and on and on, the fabrications, because the actual story that he actually investigated was not interesting enough to put on primetime Sunday night TV.
Yeah.
So it was all, and he was so proud of it. In the end, he came and told us afterwards, we got, I think it was 3 million or something views, I can't remember, from that show. And it was all lies. Like, there wasn't a single fact, aside from that I was claiming I was Jesus. There wasn't another single fact.
They even got our ages wrong.
Ages and everything.
There was so many things wrong.
Wrong. There wasn't a single fact validated, and yet almost every news agency who publishes it since,
they quote,
and even Wikipedia are saying what he said.
I think someone updated.
Someone's tried to update it, but we tried to update it. They wouldn't have a bar of it. We said it was all false. Wouldn't have a bar of it. So the problem is once one of these media organisations fabricates falsehood, and they know you're not going to sue them for doing so, then all the other media organisations can use them to quote.
They're a source.
They're as a resource, as a fact, as if it's fact. And we've had that experience over and over again. So when we look at what's going on the news and on telly, you can imagine our thoughts. It's sort of like, if that's happened to us, what do you think's happening to almost everybody who appears on? How much of it is actually true, or how much of it is a fabrication? And I know so many people who have had, business people and other people around the world who have had this same interaction where they were quoted out of context, purposefully manipulated, and basically bullied and all these kind of things. And yet the average person on earth still thinks that if it's in the media, it must be true.
Yeah.
And this blows me away that you even would think such a thing, given our experience. But also, if you look at the experience of what happened during that crisis, the one that started in 2019, I can't mention its name because of this YouTube will block that on the video as well. But all of that as well has had all the media inflamed, and everything was inflamed more and more and more. And if you look at all these crises happening around the world now, there is an inflammation of those things because the media earns money from you looking at their pages. And the more fear they can generate, the more you'll look.
Yeah.
And the more you look, the more you're feeding the engine. The engine of this deceit and manipulation and lies. And you cannot guarantee that anything you're seeing is truthful. Now, that's what's causing many people around the world to become very dissatisfied with mainstream politics and religion and media. Because a lot of times you can't trust what's being said to you, right? Now, this is a fundamental problem for humanity, because if you can't trust what's being said to you, then how do you assess what's going on in the world? It's very difficult to assess it accurately. And this is something that's going to be a problem in the future, where more and more people are going to become more and more disillusioned with the big businesses of the world because of their deceit, because they're not truthful. So any organisation at this moment in time that begins a policy of actually living in harmony with truth and openness from now onwards, as an organisation, you will be an organisation that God's law supports, and also everybody at some point will start recognising you're doing that, and they'll love you for it, just for the fact that you share truth and you're honest, And this is something that's to do with, remember yesterday we introduced this God's standard of love. God's standard of love is always truthful. Always truthful. So, truth. The presentation of and the delivery of truth is very, very important. And this way, your personal interactions with family and friends and the work colleagues, in being open, honest and truthful is such an important thing to maintaining a relationship with any person, right? And that applies to businesses as much as it applies to individuals. Yeah. So that's one of God's standards. Now, we haven't had the chance on this trip yet to talk about truth very much. We've mostly been talking about law establishing truth. So that was something we talked about. I think we introduced that in Austria, didn't we? And we talked about law establishing what the truth is, moral truth, what's right and wrong. And in Portugal, we got a bit waylaid with a lot of spirit stuff that we had to deal with and other things. But the second part of the group, we actually talked about beliefs and how important truthful beliefs are to your progress. And in England, we did a similar thing when we started talking about God's laws again and living in harmony with the law, but we focused more on the principle of living in harmony with the law rather than the importance of living in harmony with truth anyway. So that is something we hope to do over the next few months in this trip, but we may not get to it. We sort of feel it will just depend a bit on the group and also the opportunities that come up with regard to how important the truth is. But one thing that most people don't understand is that truth and love cannot exist without each other, right? So if there is no truth, there is also no love, right? If there's no truth, there's also no love. And if there's no love, there's also no truth, right? The way you deliver the truth has to be direct, to the point, specific, honest, not mystical, not, like in a state of like pandering or conciliatory, but direct and to the point, right? Every time you become pandering, conciliatory with regard to delivery of truth, you are diluting its power. So it's not an act of love to do that. But see, most people on earth think it is, but it's not.
Yeah, and I find as a recovering panderer, as you work through that emotionally, you come to see that pandering is very disrespectful to truth. It's saying the truth is not a thing of beauty and power as it is.
In itself.
And it's also quite condescending to the person that you're pandering to, because you're saying you can't handle the truth.
You can't handle the truth. That kind of,
I need to make it more palatable to you. I need to make you feel okay and that's actually saying that you can't handle not only the truth, but you can't handle your feelings. Yeah. And God's truth is quite the opposite.
Yeah.
That everyone can handle their feelings, and the truth is in and of itself a gift.
Yeah. So having the right relationship with truth is very important in your life, and it's something we want to talk a lot more about, obviously. And for the most part, every time you're in an addiction, you do not want the truth, right? So even though you think you do, you don't, right? And even though you'd like to believe you do, you don't. Because addictions are based upon lies. If we just look at the dynamic of an addiction, the dynamic of an addiction is you have some grief, or you could call it extreme sorrow, loss. You've got grief, and then above that, you're very afraid of this. This for most people is like, I cannot go there, and so what you do is you put a layer of fear over the top of the grief. Now, fear are all the false expectations appearing real about your grief. So, if I go to my grief, I will never get over it. Like I'll be crying every day for the rest of my life. That kind of a belief. That's a false belief, because what happens actually with the soul is when you release an emotion, it's a permanent thing that happens. It leaves you for good, right? So a lot of the beliefs people have about grief and about emotion generally, remember, grief can be in many forms. Remember I said to, was it Robert yesterday, about looking at that non-violent communication and looking at the emotions. I don't agree with the rest of their website at all, because it's all about faking truth. But that particular discussion about, understanding your negative emotions and understanding your positive ones, this will help you identify all those sort of negative emotions. Despair is like grief, isn't it? It's very similar. So we got a lot of fear about feeling these things. So fear is the false expectation appearing real. So the problem with fear is that it creates expectations. We come to expect and demand things. And what we expect and demand is that we can get away from our grief all the time and also not acknowledge our fear is in this dynamic of expectations and demands. If you think about expectations and demands, they're really rage. They're really anger, right? So what happens instead is we've got this grief, we've got this fear, but we go, I'm not in a rage. So you either go into like complete denial. But usually before then, to maintain a state of denial, you have to be in addictions. Right? Now, what addictions do is they help you either avoid your fear or avoid your grief. Avoid your terror of your grief or your grief itself. That's the purpose of the addiction. The addiction is created by the expectation and demand that you have to avoid something, right? So that's the purpose of the fear, is to buffer you, to cause you to believe that you shouldn't have to go there. You shouldn't have to go to where the pain is. You should be able to avoid it somewhere or another. So instead, go to the addiction, create the addiction. Now, addictions cause you to live in a state of permanent lies about almost everything. That's the purpose of them. It's sort of like, I need my coffee in the morning. It's a physical addiction. It's a lie. You don't need coffee in the morning. You don't need coffee ever, actually. It's well known that if a baby has coffee, right, it can destroy a lot of its internal systems. It's well known that this is the case, right? This is why they advise pregnant women to not drink coffee during pregnancy, right, during the developing fetus. So if it's bad for the fetus, it's bad for you. You understand? Like, the world knows this, but drinking the coffee helps me suppress my fears. It helps me suppress my worries. It calms. Ironically, it's a stimulant that I can use to distract myself from the other things that are, like, I don't want to be stimulated about. Like
Don't want to feel fear.
I don't want to feel fear, which is a heightened state of. So instead, I have a coffee, which is a stimulant, which actually causes me to overcome my fear with a stimulant. And it's an addiction, right? Because I have an expectation and demand to avoid my fear and my grief, right? What I'm terrified of, I want to avoid. And when the addictions are not met, that's when people go into rage. Anger and rage, right? And we've got to start to understand ourselves that all of those things begin because we don't want to face the emotional truth. This is where our truth is. We don't want to face it, right? So every person who's in a rage is not in a state of wanting truth. Every person who stays in their addiction is not in a state of wanting truth. Every person who justifies their fears, not in a state of wanting truth yet. Right? And one of the reasons why we're trying to talk to you about emotions sometimes is so that you can understand the dynamic and understand what's happening to you as to what you're trying to avoid. You follow? But fundamentally, you're trying to avoid the emotional experience of the truth. That's what you're trying to avoid by doing this. The emotional experience of this truth you're trying to avoid. So one grief might be that somebody did something to me and I'm trying to avoid the emotional experience of that truth. Another one might be I'm doing something to somebody else which is unloving and I want to avoid the emotional experience of that as well. Right? It could be you want to harm somebody or they wanted to harm you. It could be for either reason, but fundamentally it's still that you don't want to know what the truth was and you don't want to feel it. Right? So this is why the truth is such an important thing to exposing this labyrinth that we've created to deny it and actually expose the real problem we have, which is our terror of the truth. Because that's really the principle. We're doing all this because we're terrified of feeling the truth. We don't want to feel the truth, right? And people will go to the extent of murdering others just to not feel truth. Yeah. The truth of their grief. So imagine, you look at the Middle East crisis. One group of people come in and harm another group of people, right? That's the trigger. Many of them lost family members, and the nation feels that like mortified because all of the nation is already avoiding all their grief from past behaviour that's already occurred, right? So they're already avoiding all that. And so they're mortified at this new event. What do? Well, let's avoid our truth more and let's live in our fear-based addictions and rage and let's now bomb the hell out of the other nation, right? Isn't that just this? It's just one group of people avoiding the truth of their grief and then doing all this very damaging things to harm another group of people who also are avoiding the truth of their grief, and then they want to respond, and then you get this dynamic of one group responding, next group. Like Mary and I have watched from the spirit world the Middle East crisis, if we want to call it that. It was going when I was there on earth 2,000 years ago. It started more than 3,500 years ago. And there's whole groups of spirits who are involved in it as well, all avoiding the truth of their grief. There's this humongous dynamic going on, and it all begins because somebody didn't want to feel pain. They didn't want to feel pain. Yeah? You want to ask, Ari?
Someone over here had their hand up too. So.
Someone over here too. Let's go here first and then...
Yeah.
Hi, yes. I have done this in my life where I had a miscarriage when I was 19. And of course I blamed God for it.
Yeah.
I was so angry with him.
Yeah.
And then when I was 27, I had my first abortion.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then a few years later, I was in a much darker state. I did it again.
Yeah.
And then I came across your videos. And then I saw your lovely interview with Barbara.
With Barbara, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I really connected with that. So I
Yep.
started working on it. And then I did it only a little bit. And I cried and prayed. And I cried and prayed. And then, I don't know what happened, but I suppressed everything.
Yeah.
And then, of course, I came here
Yeah.
now because I want to face what I've done.
Yeah.
And I want to help those souls just have some peace also on the other side.
Yeah. Naturally you would.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
last night I left here and I know I cried a lot, but I feel when I try to get into it, I have this, it's like if I cry into it and then if I take this breath, everything disappears. Like there's nothing and I'm left kind of, okay, I'm not connected to anything.
Yeah.
And then I try and pray, but I know I have so much rage and fear because of my parents that I'm not connecting to God.
Yes, but
But
can I interrupt you for a bit?
Please.
Is that all right?
Yeah.
Firstly, yes, you have that grief, right? And it's very appropriate to feel the grief of guilt. When you've done something wrong, this is very appropriate to feel the grief of guilt. However, we've got to find the cause of why it was done. So when you start focusing on the grief of of the guilt, so you, from God's perspective, guilty just means you did it or you didn't do it. Yes or no?
Yes.
Right? And you know you've done
Yes.
something, and you also know it took away their life, so it was a bad thing.
Yes.
You already know that, right? So on that level, you're sort of more in alignment with God now, aren't you? Because you're more in agreement that it's the wrong thing to
That
do.
is true what I've done, yes.
That's right. You're facing the truth about what you did to to the children.
Yes.
Right? But not yet facing the truth about what caused you to do it.
Yes. And I made those lists last night
Yeah.
and this morning
Yep.
because I found another video of you saying about the law of compensation.
Yep.
And I believe that's where I've been for the last, maybe since then, as in these feelings, abortion will pop into my head, I
Yep.
need to pray, and then I suppress it.
Yeah.
But I want to get through this now. So that's
Of what the cause is.
yes.
Yeah. And when you look at the cause, and it's something I did discuss with Barbara during the abortion videos, I think a
Okay.
bit.
Yes.
Not a lot. But
Not a lot, yeah.
But a bit. And we did discuss, a bit about what may be the causes. I
Yes.
didn't mention for her what the actual causes were, but what may be. But the reality is, what God's trying to do with you is the whole purpose of the law of compensation is to deal with the cause.
Yes.
So if you look at the cause versus the effect, and we of course want to have a lot more detailed conversations about cause and effect in the future, but we haven't had the chance to at this stage very much at all. But if you look at the cause, the effect is the abortion,
Yes.
so the unloving action taken towards another, that's the effect. Now, when you cry in your grief about the effect, and I'm not talking about involving God at this stage, I'm just saying when you cry in your grief about the effect, you are facing the truth of the effect. So this is good. This is progress. Okay. Yep. And then, of course, once you face the truth about the effect, if you were just working through compensation, you would then want to look at why did I do it? Right? Now, if you think to the very first abortion, what situation you were in, and what justifications you had, then that helps you feel about what caused you to make the decision. Does that make sense? And for most people, the cause is actually more grief associated with it than the effect.
And can I say, actually, the cause where you're at the moment, there's still fears and rage about sort of causing you to not feel the cause is a problem, if you know what I mean. That's why you're getting shut down, because the cause starts to come, and then you feel like, no, it was, you can't say it was right anymore, but the feeling in you is still like, I didn't have any choice. I had to do it, and that's just you not yet feeling the truth
About the effect.
about
the
cause.
cause. Yep.
Yeah.
Cause.
Yes. Yeah.
Yep.
So if I go through each cause,
Yeah, there'll be a number of causes. For most women
there's a
having
few.
abortions, there's quite a number.
Yeah.
A lot to do with family, view of society, the
Yeah.
person who was the father,
yeah,
things like that. You're going to have to let yourself feel about that are all part and parcel of the cause.
Yeah.
And you're going to have to feel about the justifications you had as well, because even though a person has all of those emotions, using the avoidance of the emotion to justify an action is also a problem, which is a principled problem
okay,
rather than just a problem relating to an emotion. So the principal problem is like, why did I think that I could avoid my own stuff by taking the life of another?
Okay.
Right? You can see there's a principal problem there, isn't it? Like you could call it a major spiritual problem in the justification of taking the life of another. The fact that I'm justifying it, there's a principle that I'm breaking there, which is the principle of life, free will, and a number of other principles that I'm choosing to break. And my justification for breaking the principle is I want to avoid the grief about the cause.
okay,
Right? So these are the things to look at with regard to that. But you can see that there's the effect, which is the guilt associated, the grief of the guilt associated with the truth, coming to face the truth. And then there's the cause, which is, why did I even think of doing it in the first place? Why was it even an option? And you can see in amongst it being an option nowadays, there's also, medical professionals who get involved. There's so-called professionals. I wouldn't call them very professional if they're, recommending the death of a child as a solution. But there's also people involved in terms of family, potentially friends, potentially the relationship with the person involved who got you pregnant in the first place. Why you chose to have sex with that person are all causes that contributed to the effect. You wouldn't have been able to get pregnant if you didn't have sex with him, right?
true.
Yeah. So that even is a cause. Like, why did you think you could? Or what was motivating you to have sex without considering consequences? And
What grief was I avoiding?
what grief was I avoiding by having sex with him? These kind of things. So there's quite a lot involved in finding the cause. And the reason why the majority of people don't want to do it is because there is a lot involved,
Yeah,
right? Now, of course, receiving God's love can help you with causes, but it doesn't help you with effects.
no,
So what I mean by that is, when you receive God's love can often find the cause and eradicate it for you if you're sincere about feeling the grief of the effect, right? But when you're trying to avoid the grief of the effect, then you're not sincere. And therefore, any prayer to God about forgiveness is not sincere. And therefore, you can't be forgiven until you're actually prepared to fully feel the grief of the effect. Yeah? And this is why the average person who prays to God for forgiveness doesn't receive it.
Yeah.
Because there's a law involved in the process of forgiveness that has to be engaged in order for for God's forgiveness to take place. And this, again, is about addressing, do you really understand the effect fully? And do you understand the reasons why you took that effect fully? Because once you do, then you'll have something to be sorry about properly.
yeah,
And then you can pray to God about helping you with that, and then God will help. Because God wants you to be fully informed about, what's involved in an act taken. He doesn't want you to just go, I did that terrible thing. It's terrible that I did it. I want forgiveness from God, but I don't know any reason why I did it. right? He wants you to know the reasons why you did it.
So if I go through the causes, my list of causes, which I do know,
Yep,
I believe, and then it's just to feel into each one.
that's right. And then also pray to God for forgiveness of each one.
Okay.
Yeah?
Yeah, but there is a spiritual principle that Jesus touched on, and it's helpful for everyone to understand. Many of us have the feeling that because I might be going to have to deal with a grief that's already stored inside of me, because I'm afraid of that grief and I feel I expect and demand I shouldn't have to feel it, or I believe I can't cope with it, then I'm justified to take an unloving action. Then I'm justified to break God's law, if you like. And that spiritual principle is something to deal with globally, because pretty much everyone on the planet has it. They're like, oh, if A, B, or C is going to happen, then all bets are off. Then I'm allowed to do something that...
If I have to feel those, then all bets are off. I can do anything I want, basically. Is the
So everyone who's had an abortion has that feeling. There's something inside of me that I believe I can't deal with, so then I'm justified to end this life. And so there's going to be the things inside of you that you thought you couldn't deal with in that situation.
Yeah.
And then there's the additional thing where you thought, and because I can't deal with it, then I'm justified to do this.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So everyone who sins, if you like, has that feeling. They have this feeling that because and it's different for everyone, there's all different feelings in everyone, but because this feeling might be coming up, then I'm allowed to take this unloving action.
I didn't want the responsibility, basically.
it's partially that, isn't it?
There's more to it than
Partially
that. Yeah.
that, but it's more than that. There's also, there's also things like, well, what's going to happen to me? Like often we have this sort of imbalance which says my life and the comfort of my life is more important than somebody else's life.
Yeah.
And obviously to have an abortion, you must believe that the comfort of your own life is more important than somebody else's whole life, which is quite an extreme, if you think about it, quite an extreme unloving position, selfish position, right? So these are the kind of things Mary's talking about, right? These sort of extreme positions that we have spiritually, not just emotionally, but spiritual positions we hold that dictate our behaviour emotionally and sexually and physically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because if you think about it, if we just didn't want responsibility, well, we'd have we'd adopt the child out.
If you couldn't sacrifice the baby's life, you would just say, and I don't want responsibility for it myself, which is a valid, you might be too young to take full responsibility, or you might not have the circumstances. Then you would just adopt the child to somebody else, wouldn't you, at birth?
Yeah, I had too much fear of my parents.
It's not just fear of your parents either, if you think about it, because if you think about it, there's also, how do I cope if I disagree with my parents? And then there's also things like, what's my comfort going to be if I go alone? So it's a lot about being alone, and not just about your parents, right? So
Society.
how is society going to perceive me back in that day, or in your environment, being a single unwed mother?
Yeah.
How are they going to treat me? There's lots involved, and also what then the reason why the adoption also isn't considered is what's it like a mother giving up her child? Like society looks down upon that like amazingly bad, as a bad act, right?
It's all my mum used to say, don't get pregnant, don't get pregnant. Like that's the only thing she used to say over and over again.
Yeah.
So of course when it happened, then I knew she was in so much fear of what our neighbours would think, family, and of course,
So you can see your worry about what other people think
is higher than the life of somebody.
Than the life of somebody.
Yeah.
So, and that's
That's
very
extreme.
Extreme.
Yeah.
And
this is the case with almost every person on
very
Earth,
common.
actually.
Yes.
Yeah.
Most people feel like to not have society's agreement is almost worse than
death.
death.
Worse than the death of somebody else, at least.
Yeah.
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 Thank you.
Yeah. All right.
Yep.
And we were over at
Aria.
So it ties into that question a little bit. You just had to speak. Yeah, you're erasing what I was going to ask.
Oh,
about,
sorry.
But that's okay. I think we remember.
I'll write it back up if I need to.
So there's all these layers that we put above the truth. So if I can, is it okay if I use your situation a little bit as an example, just in like a small way, or not?
The abortion situation, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Because just it's like the mother has this fear of everyone, like she has this fear of what other people think, and then this fear gets passed on to her. So now she has this fear of what everyone thinks.
But see how, Aria, you're blaming the fear. But see, be very careful about blaming the fear.
This is so common.
This is very common that everybody does. They blame the fear. You see, and actually blaming fear causes you to believe that you have a justified reason for doing a thing.
That's not where I wanted to go with my question.
No, but if you think about it, it's not the fear that caused her to do it. It wasn't the fear of
What everybody
everybody else thought.
Yeah, I just used that as an example to ask my question because I have a question about something that's related to that.
Yep.
Go ahead.
But it wasn't the fear in the first place, as long as you understand that it wasn't the fear of what people thought that caused her to take the action. She's saying it was the fear. I get that, but it wasn't.
Well, it's to avoid the pain of the truth.
Correct.
Yeah.
That's
So,
it.
but I was just my point in it is
Now,
that
can I
she,
just stop you, Aria? You're getting annoyed with me.
Sorry.
And there's no need to be annoyed with me. I'm just trying to explain for everybody else's sake that when you start talking about the fear being the cause, I've got to say, no, sorry, everyone needs to understand it's not the fear being the cause.
Yeah.
The fear is the justification to avoid the cause.
I don't know if I said though that it's the cause. I'm not sure. Maybe I said that, but I'm not sure.
Now you want to argue with me on top of that.
I just want to be authentic and truthful because one of my challenges is to speak my truth. So
Yeah,
I'm
but have some
doing-
respect for us too, hey?
Yeah.
Like, have some respect. This is our gift of our time for you.
I just asked a question.
no,
and you
but I-
interrupted me while I'm asking a question, and now
I'm allowed to. It's my group. I'm allowed to. It's my group.
It's important for us to ensure that everyone understands.
Correct.
Yeah. And when you precursor the question with, so here's the situation, she inherited the fear from the mum. And
Yeah.
we want to point out that's not the problem. So we need to make that clear before you
Right,
ask
it
your
was just
question.
very directed at me. Like I need to be aware of the fear, not being the cause. But I didn't
Yep.
even say it was. So I was just a bit confused there as to why that happened. But if it's for everyone else as an explanation, it makes
Well,
sense.
it's also
to
for
me.
you. It's
So
important
also for you,
understand.
you don't
Yeah.
really get it either.
No, you don't.
That's why I said it.
That's why you
Well,
precursor
I
the
wanted
question.
to just talk about how the truth is beneath it. Like that's where I was going to get to, but you interrupted me before I could get to that. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. And it's hard for me to do this kind of stuff and say what I actually think. So I'm just actually doing something that's hard for me right now, but I'm doing. So.
You're doing it quite
Yeah,
aggressively.
you're very aggressive in the way in which you're doing it. And the reason why you are is because you think that I'm trying to get you off your subject, and I'm not. I just want to clarify for your sake, as well as everyone else's here, that the thought that feeling a fear is the actual justification of not feeling grief. The fear are false things being created to not feel grief, not true things. They're not real, they're false. And so the real reasons are frequently about what we feel about grief itself, not just the truth of the grief, but the grief itself.
Yeah.
And it's very important to understand that it's not the fear that is the justification of the action. It's the avoidance of the grief, that the fear is a whole labyrinth of creations which are created purposefully to avoid the truth of what's going on here. So these fears are not even real. They're just fabrications. They're things you fabricate, right? And it's very important that everybody, including you, understand that if you want to process something. Yep.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I was not purposely trying to be unpleasant. I apologize if I was in any way.
Well, you get frustrated and angry, and we understand that. And quite often you're projecting at me quite unloving emotions. And, you know, if you continue to do so, obviously at some point you might be removed. But, well, I'm going to tolerate it for a bit, but not a long time, right? There's no justification to get angry with me. I'm sharing my time with you for free. No justification. I understand the frustration. You need to own it and feel it. That's all.
Can I ask my question?
Sure you can.
Okay, so in childhood, we're like raised by our caregivers, so we can absorb a lot of their ways of dealing with stress. This is not what my question is about yet. What I'm leading is, we get these layers built on top of the truth because there can be trauma and it can be too much to feel in the moment. Or is that not, like, would you say that's wrong? How do you define, like, how does childhood trauma happen? Is there too much pain and we can't feel it, and so we start building these layers on top of it? Is it because the truth is too painful?
No.
Or are we actually equipped with it and we disconnect from it? Like, I just want to know your stand on that.
Yeah, sure. It's not because there's too much pain. It's because we've been taught that we're incapable of feeling that pain. So the problem is that during childhood, you've got to remember you're growing up in an environment where your parents are just terrified of their own feelings. Most of the time, they're just terrified of their own feelings. And in particular, the thing they're terrified the most of is their own sin. Because in the very long run, and also in their spirit state, in their sleep state, there is some level of consciousness in most people. They've done a whole series of things wrong and they're going to have to pay for it at some point, right? So they're terrified of sin. They're terrified of feeling the consequences of it, right? So you're growing up as a child in that environment. But the way God created you is you're a sensitive person. You are sensitive to everything going on around you. So one of the things you're sensitive to is that you would love to feel. As a child, you love, like every child cries generally when they're born and shortly after for quite some time sometimes. And the reason why is the child loves to feel it, loves to release things. It's been created to do it almost, because the child is most connected to its soul at that point without any conscious limitation in its head, suppressing its feelings. And so it wants to feel. The child wants to feel. It can handle any grief. It's happy to cry for 4 hours. All of you parents know that, right? How many times did your children cry for 4 hours? Quite. A lot of parents are rocking them and driving them around, trying to get them calm down, but the child's happy to keep just crying. It's like,
well, maybe we can't say they're necessarily happy.
It's not happy, but
that they can experience that. They can cope.
They're handling it.
Yes, they are handling the
level of grief that's already inside their soul. They're already handling it by letting it out.
Yeah,
already doing it.
They're doing what God designed them to do to be free of it, if you like. Yeah.
Already, and this is happening right from the time of birth generally onwards. Because remember, we said they've accrued already some of that grief through what's happened in their womb, right? So what does the parent then do? So what methods do they use?
Guilt, shame.
Well, with a little child, it's hard to guilt them, isn't it? What do they do?
Oh, stop crying.
Okay, so one of the first things is calm them. The parents really just trying to calm themselves down, right? Really, but
shushing them.
So it's like trying to force calm, which is actually an unloving act. They're trying to force calm on the process that the child is already in and able to do for itself, and the parent is trying to force calm. And the main reason why the parent's doing it is because the parent wants to feel calm. Because the parent's absolutely distressed that it's a bad parent while my child's crying, And it is amazing, isn't it, as a parent, those of you who've been a parent, when you're crying, when your child is crying, a lot of times you're more distressed than the child is, which means that you've got more grief than they probably have to release, right? So that's one thing. What else?
Distract. Give them food.
Distract, yeah.
Very good. Distract.
So common. We see that all the time when we're traveling,
Yeah.
A child might be feeling a bit upset. Here's a screen,
Here's a lolly,
here's
here's
some
a
food.
treat.
Look at the birdie,
Yeah.
Look out the window, like that kind of. And if you were crying, you imagine as an adult, you're crying, and somebody's saying to you, look out the window.
Yes.
Like, isn't that going to go like, that's really hard, right? Just shut up and let me feel is what you'd feel, right? What else?
I don't know if that goes under force calm, but tell them it's not a problem, like it didn't even happen.
Yes.
Yes, like completely deny that
Deny the truth.
There was that there was a problem at all.
Undermine their perception of what's happening.
And you could call that gaslighting, but you're doing it to a little child who doesn't even have the intellect to know what's going on, unfortunately, and you're already doing it to them. What else? Any other ideas?
Oh, wow. Next to me, what's your name?
Eva, yeah.
Just said aggression.
Aggression, yeah.
Threats of violence. It's
Threats
very
of
violent.
Firstly, it starts with threats, doesn't it? threat. And then for many of us, like me included, it's been
Actual violence.
actual violence. Well, now you think about actual violence from a parent to a child. In law, if you're violent physically to another person as an adult, you get put in jail generally, or you go to court for it. And yet, how many children, like on the same level, we've got these little tiny kids who are getting hammered by their parents oftentimes, belted, for the justification in my childhood, and I did that with my own children too, was religious justification, spare the rod, spoil the child, that kind of thing. And all sorts of violent justifications to be violent towards children. So actual violence. Right, what else? Any ideas? So these are the main ones, right? Aren't they? Yep.
There's lots of ways those things come about, aren't they?
Aren't they?
Yeah.
Right. But you just look at those 5 things for a moment. Let's say we've just given it a brief thought, and the other 5 things that sort of pop up at the moment. You're a child. Imagine what effect that is having on you about your calm, about feeling emotion. Like, it's intense on the child. And you can understand why by the time the child's 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years of age, it doesn't know how to connect to any of its own emotions or have any confidence in itself at all.
Yeah. You
with
lose the
regard to
confidence to feel you can feel anything because you're taken away from that natural process so often that then when now emotion comes up in you, you're now worried about not only are all these things going to happen to me, I'm going to be told it's not true, or I now have to question even if it's true, what bad thing is going to happen to me if I feel this. But also it's like when you're riding a bike, the more you do it, the more confident you are. Oh, you just get on and ride. You just get on and you don't even have to think about it. But if we're shut down from that process of learning to ride the bike, every time we just start to get it going and someone knocks us off, we don't know that we can get beyond a few pedal pushes, do we? Mm-hmm. And so then we think, oh, it was too much for me to cope with my childhood. But actually we were taken away from coping with our childhood, sometimes violently. And even the forced calm can be very violent towards a child, can be very violent, even if it's done in supposedly dulcet tones, soft tones. The feeling sometimes coming from a mother who's trying to comfort her child is often quite aggressive, isn't it? Shut up, basically.
Not only aggressive, there's a withdrawal, a very strong withdrawal of love that occurs with all of these, a very strong withdrawal of love from the parent to the child, which the child is the most sensitive to because it's so young. And it feels like if a parent withdraws love from a child, the child's life is now threatened. It's very survival. If the parent doesn't love the child's very survival on earth is threatened. That's how severe it is for the child. Right. So the truth is, you wanted to say more.
You're good.
The truth is that as these are the things that we actually don't want to feel. So they're the grief, and then we put a fear on it that says, "I can't do it because of my parents."
Or I can't cope with it. I didn't have the capacity. It was too much.
I didn't have the capacity. So in that fear, you're blaming yourself for what the parents did, rather than the grief is, the parents did this. That's the grief. And coming to face that and feel that and go the way through it and come to face inside of yourself that actually a lot of the grief that I'm avoiding is actually truth that I'm avoiding about my life.
And this...
You were going to say?
Yeah, it's really then a process of reestablishing that connection with your emotions to eventually get to being able to feel the whole truth.
That's right.
But I wonder if that's just a process rather than you being able to face that all at once.
It is a process,
yeah.
I agree. But you've got to be very careful that you don't use your fears to justify not going through the process, which is what most people do. So what most people do is they say, it was right for me to be afraid of my parents. And I'm going, well, as a child it might have been right, because it's pretty scary, right? But as an adult, if you carry this with you as an adult, it's going to damage the rest of your life. You're going to do all of this to other people probably. There's a heap of things you will do to avoid the truth of your own life, but you'll also encourage others to avoid theirs as well. There's a whole lot of unlovingness, a whole lot of sin that you're going to commit while these feelings are there, but you don't deal with them. So the fear is saying, I don't have to deal with it.
Yeah.
Right? The grief, the truth of the grief is, yes, you do. Yes, you do. You have to come face to face with the fact that your parents did these things. And to be frank, most parents on earth did these things, maybe with the exception of the fifth, number 5, but they pretty much did everything else, right? Almost every one of you, well, I'd say every one of you, from what I can feel, has had these experiences in your childhood. And this is very scary for a very sensitive soul, which is what the child is, who is in a state of fairly connected to what love is as well. Remember, by the time he's born, he's usually in the 4th or 5th sphere in terms of his measure of love. And so he's measuring what's coming from the hells without being able to understand it. He's measuring what's coming from the hells emotionally. And this is like life-threatening stuff coming from the hells, from his parents, into him. And of course, he's scared to death of feeling emotion in that moment, but that's the grief he's avoiding through the fear. So,
Yeah.
yep.
And maybe we can extend it, Jay, if we draw some more griefs down here.
Yep.
So, if you like, all of these things, if they're in our environment as a kid, which they are, they become that. It's like we're in that soup all the time, aren't we? Now, individual, actually big things can happen also that are what some people call traumatic events.
Such as like getting abused, like,
Yes.
or being belted, even, a
Yes.
child being belted.
Even the loss, or the death of a parent, or the car accident, or, bullying at school.
Physical events.
Yeah, physical, actual sort of what we could call maybe more isolated events. They can form things that get shut down in us. But the reality is we're also already in this soup of things that we have a grief about as well.
That is all getting suppressed already.
Yes. And there's patterns also within our family that cause different types of grief. So if we had an overbearing dad and an absent mother, or we'll have particular griefs relating to those things. But we have to be careful that we don't. So we know the truth, or I know the truth, that in order for me to heal and become a loving, truthful person, I'm going to need to deal with all the griefs that are inside of me. But the reason,
the actual cause of them.
the actual cause of these things,
Yeah.
that happened. And also, as an adult now, I'm going to have grief about things that I've done to other people that are actually in me as well.
And that's also a part of the sin that's stored in there as well.
Yes. And you could call them, what I'm doing is putting them in a layer underneath this grief, which is all of my grief really, if you think about how I was treated when I was emotional, when I was a child. But I think what I'm wanting to say to you, Aria, is we have to be careful that we don't sort of in our fear say, well, it's all too much to deal with that stuff because we've got all these problems with this grief about feeling emotion, if you like, as well. When the reality is, it is our responsibility to deal with all that grief. And as you said, it's going to be a process. But the problem is when we're quite bound up in fear or justification, we get to the initial grief about feeling feelings and we go, well, it wasn't safe for me to feel feelings. How can I be expected to feel the actual problems in my life as well? And the truth is we can do it. We
also get quite focused on justifying us not wanting to feel the grief associated with our sin.
Yeah.
As well. So we're not prepared, as you were doing earlier, feeling some of the grief about the actual sin, the abortion, for example. This is a very important process too, because usually what people do in this state here is they justify all their sin.
Yeah.
And justify not looking at the cause of it, and justify not feeling things that actually happened, the truth of it, the truth of their grief. So they justify, in their state of fear, they justify almost everything as to why they shouldn't change something. Now, it is true that as you grow, you will gradually become more aware of things. That is a natural process of your growth, right? But you've got to be careful that you're not using that excuse of gradual progress to actually excuse looking at a whole heap of things.
Yeah.
which is what most people do.
They
Yeah,
do.
for sure.
Yeah.
The question is just, as a child, can a child start this process? Like, I think there would need to be assistance to let them know that it's safe to feel
Well,
their
this
emotions.
this would have to change.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There would have
As
to
a
be an
child,
environment.
it's almost impossible unless you have a parent who's changed. So we have seen some parents actually, like Eloisa is probably a good example, where she started to change a lot. So this is Eloisa, who is now one of the managers we have in God's Way in Australia, and she's a good friend of ours. But when she first started, her kids were, I think one was just born, one was 2, one was 5, 4, when she started to look at herself, right? Now, as she worked through her different problems, she became less forcing calm, less distracting of her children, less in denial.
Less distracting of her own emotions, less denying of her own emotions, less...
Because there's also, in amongst this, a lot of people don't realise, and this is a big problem nowadays, is that these aren't the only ways to get a child out of their stuff. Another way is to feed a whole lot of demands in the child, to actually give the child a whole heap of things that it comes to expect that it shouldn't be getting. You understand? And this is actually an area where most people on earth don't even look at all, right? Where they've sort of projected or given to the child a whole heap of actions or feelings that actually, if you do it, it causes a child to enter expectations. So we now see little 2-year-olds bossing their entire family as a result of that, right? And that's even worse than some of these things, because it has such a powerful effect on how they treat others in their later life. So you could call it, you're basically letting your child be a bully, right? And things like that. And that can be very damaging as well. So what happens, though, is when these things have happened, and there's all sorts of things you could say that were negative to the child, but also perceived as positive, given to the child, which are actually not positive, and all those things given cause the child then to enter its own sin, right? And its own sin is going to also have grief associated with it. Now, if the parent does not deal with these, you can see the parent's going to continue projecting all of these things on the child. The child's in a very unsafe environment. How can we expect it to change? You can't expect it to change. The only change that's really going to happen is after it leaves its home and moves on with its life. And the more removed from its parents it is, the higher the chance is going to be that they actually deal with some of it, right? If they stay bound to their parent forever, or for their entire life, often they won't deal with it their entire life, and they'll deal with it in the spirit world, right? But if the parent creates an environment now, and actually the parent does their own work, dealing with their own grief, and comes to no longer accept their own fear as a justification for their sin, that has a great effect on the child, right? Yeah. And so by the time they might have had damage, 2 years of age or early, and then the parent begins this process, by the time the child's 12, almost all of its injuries will be only its own. And nothing to do with the parent, if the parent has worked through all those things. And this is a very good gift as parents that you give your children. The gift of, imagine if you did that before you had a child, that would be fantastic. But if you haven't, and many of us who've become parents haven't, so if you deal with it after, you're giving them the best opportunity to make change. But you're dead right, Aria. If all of these things are happening as a child, and if the environment does not change, it's going to be very, very hard.
And there's going to be a lot to deal with once you move out.
Correct.
Yeah.
And you'll start dealing with probably once you move out, and in particular once you start connecting to other families, seeing other things happening in the world, and having some experience in the world, you start looking at your own family and going, it wasn't that good here and it wasn't that good there. And so you start critiquing things a bit as an adult. But unfortunately, there's also been the added problem in that we've become so afraid of our own emotion, right, that we start using fear of our own emotion as a justification to not deal with that as well. So it is tough. So we're recognising it's tough, but it is a very good experience for your health, for your long-term life, not just your life now on earth, but, your future life in the spirit world, and also for your joy, to develop over time. This is why it's such an important experience. But the main problems we face from God's perspective is the justification of our sin, and our fear is the main way we do it.
Yeah.
It's the main way we do it.
Yeah.
Right, this applies once we're adults primarily.
Yeah.
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 Okay, there's lots of questions. I want to give the mic over.
Yeah, let's, so can we come to Olga down the front on this side and Charlotte on this side? Thank you.
Just keep your hand up, Olga. Yeah.
As a child, when we have like an unsafe environment, is it also often the case that we bond with spirits so we don't feel unsafe anymore?
Yeah. Yeah.
Can
And
be.
so we-
Can be.
Not all people, but
Okay.
Yeah, it
So
can be.
we actually have to work on to not have the relationship with the spirit anymore, so we actually can get.
Well,
to
it depends
the-
a bit, doesn't it? Because there's two types of relationships you can have with a spirit. So this is you, me. And there's two types of relationship I can have with a spirit. These are both spirits. One is a spirit who's unloving towards me, and another is a spirit who's loving towards me from God's standard. Now, obviously, a spirit who's loving towards me, it'll be good to keep that relationship, wouldn't it? But if a spirit who's unloving towards me, no love, I would say, towards me, and that's actually just using me for their own addictions, then it would be very good if I could get rid of that relationship. Yeah. So don't be afraid of all relationships with spirits. And also, you don't need to be afraid of any spirit, whether they're unloving or loving, but it's good to deal with what the codependence occurs between an unloving spirit and yourself. And we see this happening where a lot of people have codependent relationships develop with spirits at a very young age, and then they live that codependence for the rest of their life, and the spirit's sort of like their pal that they go through life with, even though at times the spirit is quite like negative, nasty to the person themselves. And this is something, remember, last week in England, we raised with many of you guys, you young guys, it was this sort of unloving spirit binding to the person. The person is going, I need to feel, like in the case of the guys last week, I need to feel great as a guy. I need to feel powerful, more powerful than my dad. I'm in a competition with my dad. I need to feel more powerful than my dad. And this spirit comes along and says, yeah, you're a great guy. You're better than your dad. And he gives you all those feelings. And then you feel you're better than your dad. And then you don't have to go through your own feelings, right? So a spirit like that isn't helping, but they often believe, the spirit believes he's helping you, right? But in the process, he's actually damaging your ability to feel and deal with your own sin and your own emotion, right? So that's a very damaging relationship. A loving spirit would not do that. A loving spirit will engage your free will. In other words, they'll allow you to make your own choices, your own decisions, your own things that you need to decide for yourself. And they will give you advice based on what you ask, right? That's how and they'll treat you in a way, they'll respect your free will. They won't give you anything you don't ask. They'll just wait for you to ask, just like God does, right? Wait for you to ask. So loving spirit, always good to have a relationship with. You want to have, if you think about it, it's the same as loving people, right? Yeah. The more loving people are in your life, the better your life's going to be, right? So if you have lots of loving spirits in your life, you want millions of them in the end, right? Yeah. Then you're going to have, even if there's no one on earth who loves you, you'll have a loving relationship with them at least. So you'll have friends and you'll feel like you have friends and you can get on with life even if nobody here likes you. But, the average person sort of doesn't feel them very much, which of course is because the average person is shut down a lot. But if you do, it can be of great benefit to your life. a loving person, whether they're in spirit or on earth. Yeah. Of course, again, it gets down to when we say loving, we're talking about God's standard of loving, not your standard. See, a lot of people. So when I'm looking at myself, we're going, okay, is my standard of love? I need cheering up. I need someone to cheer me up. If that's my standard of love, this unloving spirit's going to cheer me up, and I'll feel, oh, he loves me. Cool, right? And the only problem is he's not loving me from God's perspective. He's actually stopping me from feeling some emotion that I need to feel so that I can feel cheered up all the time, rather than needing somebody to cheer me up. If the spirit is going, if you're feeling a bit low, unworthy, and he says, no, you're worthy, you're worthy, you're worthy. If you're feeling a bit sexually dirty and he says, no, you're sexually great, like I think you're hot, and this kind of stuff, and he's cheering you up in all of these ways, can you see that's going to cause you to feel like you're loved? If that's your definition of love, you'll feel like you're loved, but from God's point of view, you're being harmed, right? Which is not love, right? So this is the problem most of us face, is that our definition of love, which has been distorted by what happened, but also has been distorted by the level of sin we've engaged in our own life, that definition of love then causes me to be more attracted to the spirit who is actually harming me, but I feel they're helping me. So I'm more attracted to that relationship, to that spirit in a dark place, than maybe what I should have done. If we want to make the diagram completely accurate, right? This spirit, he's pulling me down in my progress by me keeping the addiction with him. You follow me? So the more I do that, the more both of us will travel towards the hills, actually, because we're not in harmony with God's definition of love. And I will have the illusion that I'm being loved in the process.
And sometimes in that place, I even think that the person who does love me, this spirit, my guide, saying, hey, Olga, you're just acting in your fear, you can do this thing, or you don't need to listen to that, like take this opportunity. Sometimes I can think, well, that's a very pressuring, it must be a dark spirit.
He's
They're
pushing
really
me around.
hassling me out, yeah.
He wants me to feel my fear. I should have
I'm so attacked.
What was Aria saying earlier? I should have, that idea that we need time to deal with things, and I want longer time to deal with it, that kind of thing. Like so he's saying, yeah, take longer time. He's saying, no, do it sooner. And he's saying, do it longer. And the person who's saying, do it sooner, you go, you're pressuring me. You're pushing me beyond what I'm capable of. This spirit often knows better what you're capable of than you know, right? And he's trying to get you to move to that place, but you're going, no, I can't handle it. I can't handle it. And he's saying, yes, you can handle it. And he's going, stop bossing me around, right? So it's really like the old
It reminds me
cartoons,
of the Disney.
isn't it? Of like nice angel on one side.
The other way, good, because this is your red one. Yeah.
Nice angel on one side. Blue and red, right? Nice angel on one side, demon on the other, right? Because he's quite demonic. When I say demonic, quite evil in his attitude. And sort of angel on one side, devil on the other, as the saying goes. And the devil's whispering, and you're going, I think I agree with that more. Right? And this person who's actually for you, trying to help you, you're going, I don't know if I want to go in that direction. He seems to me to be a bit bossy, pushing me around and trying to make me do things I don't feel like doing. And, he's asking me to feel some of my fear, and I don't like that. That's not loving. He's asking me to feel some of my grief. That's not very pleasant. That's not very loving, And this other one's going, you don't have to feel any of it. I'll help you with everything. We'll have a good relationship. And you're going, yeah, they love me. They care about me. And this is the trouble, is that our own measure of what love is frequently very distorted from the childhood experience, right? And also from the sin we personally have engaged in our life. Yeah.
So if we work on our sin, we automatically gonna be drawn more to the loving ones.
Yes, as you, the more desire you have, not just, a lot of people work on this because it's sort of like the law forces you to. That's not what's going to attract these spirits. What's going to attract these loving spirits is you're not only forced to, but now you want to.
I want to become a more loving person. I want to be moral. I want to be truthful. I want to give. I want to learn what that's like. All of those things. I want to live by what we talked about last weekend, God's principles. I want them to be a part of my life. I want to live in harmony with them. When you start having desires like that, wow, our spirit friends love that. They're like, great, here, we're here to help. Yeah. But they're very respectful. The most loving spirits are so respectful of your free will. Yeah. They would never impose upon you. As soon as, if you think about Jesus' little diagram there, as soon as they're on your shoulder and say, hey, Olga, there's a fear here, and you go, I don't want to look at it, they'll go, okay. Just wait for the next moment. You might be a little bit open, but they're not going to keep at you because they're very, very respectful.
They sort of just bow out, right?
Yeah.
And now who are you listening to?
Yeah.
The one who meets your addiction.
And then sometimes you get into a really painful place or a terrible place. You think, my life is not working. What's going on? And then they'll come up and go, hey, Olga, there's that fear. And if you go, oh, I don't want to look at that, then they go, okay, I'll step back.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so obviously the ones you want to have with you are the angels, but the trouble with them is, if we can call it trouble with them, is that they'll only come when you are meeting or you have desires in harmony with God's standard of love, right?
Yeah.
And that's where most of us fail, because most of us have desires. Remember, desire is like faith. Faith for our future. Desire is desire motivating you for a future. And if your desire is to avoid things, then that's a very corrupt faith, a very corrupt desire. And of course, they're not going to help you avoid things. And it's interesting, if you don't help somebody avoid something, the average person gets very angry, right? When you help them avoid it, they're very happy with you, right? And that is indicative of the fact that the desire in me is not developed enough towards God's standard, and instead I'm holding on to my own standards, right? Which is a big problem we face when we want to progress. And particularly progress in terms of God's standard of love, because remember, the reception of God's love is dependent upon me recognising my sin. In a few weeks ago, we were in, I think it was, we introduced it in Linton, didn't we, in north of England, and then we talked about it more in the south of England. The whole concept of awakening to sin has to happen in order for you to receive God's love. And the average person on earth does not want to awaken to their sin. They don't want to. They don't want to see their faults or see their problems, right? The average person on earth would instead prefer to avoid their problems as much as possible, right? And whenever somebody doesn't feed their problem, they get angry, right? So that's indicative of the fact that the person who's in loving the person would not feed them at all. And this is where many people have problems with me, right? Where they're so angry with me about how they think I've treated them, but actually I'm treating them the way God's laws require I treat them under the circumstances of what the sin is, right? And they expect somebody to treat them in a more, what they see as a more loving manner, right? And this is a big problem we see on earth. And as a result of that big problem, you are attracted to the people. So you could say it's not only spirits, is it? You're going to be attracted to the people who treat you in the manner that you define love to be. And that can be far removed from God's standard of love. But you're thinking, they're loving me. You're thinking it's fantastic. I've got good friends. I've got good family. I've got whatever it is, good work companions and so forth, because you think they're all treating you well. But fundamentally, all of these people are just meeting addictions which you interpret as love, right? And so in the process of meeting your addictions, you feel good And you think, the feeling I get from them is so wonderful. They're so nice. I just want to spend more time with them and everything. And also, of course, this is going on spiritually as well as physically. So not only are you doing that with people, but you're also doing that with the spirits that are with people and with you. And so you can end up carrying a posse of friends, some of which are on earth and some of which are in spirit, all wanting you to stay in the place where you currently are. And then when some person or spirit comes along and says, look, this is actually very damaging to you, you go, what are you talking about? I don't see that, right? And in our arrogance, in that state, see, sin always causes a state of arrogance. We go, I don't get it. I don't think that's true. I think it's all different to that. Yeah. So what we do is we, unfortunately, neglect the opportunities given to actually start to look at ourselves, but also look at who are actually our friends versus who are actually helping us to stay in a codependent addiction with them, right? And it's the codependent addictions that are going to kill your love for God.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's going to destroy any relationship you have with God. Codependent addictions with others. And the more sort of angry you get about different situations is proof generally about the more codependent addictions you have. Yeah? Yeah. What's the time?
Charlotte had her hand up. Yeah, it's 20 to 1.
21? Yep, Charlotte.
So it's about the childhood stuff.
Yep, this stuff we had here.
Yeah.
Yep.
I don't have a lot of memories about my childhood.
Most people don't.
Yeah, and I wonder how to work through that, and even today, like my memory is really, really bad. I can't even sometimes remember the topics from your last talks. So.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. So the real question is, how do I face a problem when I don't know it's there? Isn't it? I can't remember it was there. I can't remember what happened to me. How do I then face my problems?
And I think earlier I connected with some of that confusion in childhood because I feel like there was a lot of gaslighting, and I'm also I have two sisters and they are doing well, I suppose.
Seemingly.
Yeah. I feel like I'm the only one struggling in the family. So what's...
Well, you're the only one open to sin, so, obviously. So let's look at family denial and its effect, right, in terms of on you as a little person. So you're as a child, you're growing up. This is you.
Charlotte.
I'm just trying to shorten Charlotte, but I can't.
Mary
and I love shortening.
Lottie. Can we call you Lottie?
No, it's not. I can't fit it in I'll have to draw you as a bigger person, Charlotte. Lotte is the spelling, is it for you?
Yeah.
Okay, so there's Charlotte. Charlotte is not that big. She's a little girl at this stage, right? So little tiny child in big mum and dad's care. Now, look, not a Scottish dad. Okay. Okay, mum and dad's care. So little Charlotte's in mum and dad's care. Mum and dad are in total denial about everything they're doing. Absolutely everything. Generally, that's the case. Most parents are almost in total denial about every little form of harm and every large form of harm they're bringing to their own children while the child is growing up. They usually have no idea. You've got to remember that these parents have been parents as long as you were a child. In other words, if they were parents, they started being parents, let's say they were in 25, and you were a 2-year-old child, then those parents have been 2-year-old parents.
If you're the oldest, yeah.
If you're the oldest, they're 2-year-old parents. They have as much experience as parenting as you have as being a child. Barely anything. And if you look at the history of the world, most people feel it's an offence to teach a parent how to be a parent. So they are very blocked to hearing anything from anybody about how I bring up my child, is the way they sort of see it, right? Very offended, even though they're like babies as parents, like, aren't they? They're 2-year-old parents, not very experienced parents, right? Obviously not having God's standard love, they've been brought up in the world standard of love, which remember we said yesterday was in the hells. And little Charlotte has come into the world and she's in this environment. And if the very first thing they are doing is denying almost everything they do, in a sense they live in a state of almost permanent denial. In a sense, I remember when I was my first child that I had, I was in a state where I didn't really know much at all about anything I was doing and how it was harming the child. I was doing my best, I thought, and this is how most parents think, but also I would have loved to have been educated, but there's no course you can go to, there's no parenting teaching that goes on the planet, hardly at all. And if there is, most of it's absolutely corrupt in the sense of how to bring up a child. And so these parents are on their own, basically. They're not connected to God. They don't have God's standard of love in them yet. And so they're on their own with regard to bringing you up. So I'm not saying that to make you feel sorry for them. I'm just saying that this is the truth of the situation that almost every person on earth has faced, right? Little Charlotte, she's brought up in this environment. The primary desire is deny as much as you can deny, emotionally. Deny as much as you can. So Charlotte, the very first thing she learns is deny as much as she can. Deny even her memories, deny her experiences, deny as much as she can, right? She's learning this from childhood.
Especially because most parents are saying, I'm defining reality. I'm defining what's
The parents are saying they are God.
happening here. Yep.
They're saying they're God. They're saying, I am your child, I am your parent, not God is your parent, but I am. And therefore, they're putting themselves in the position of God with you, right? So they're already thinking of themselves as God in your life.
And they're saying, I'm taking these actions for these good reasons, and this is what is happening in our family. They're defining that to you.
Yep.
And if you start to have a feeling or an experience that is different from what they're defining, you can see that little Charlotte has got a decision to make. It's a pretty tough decision, isn't it?
But she's having to make this decision way before she's even got an intellect to make it.
She doesn't even understand she's got to make a decision, but inside of her, she's having to decide, well, do I
Accept.
honour my experience, or do I accept what these big God-like people are saying is happening here
To my experience.
in my life?
So the average child learns the way to get along with their parents is to accept their parents' version of their experience. Right? To do that, you have to deny most of your own experience. Internally, you have to shut it down. You have to distance yourself from it. And one of the ways most children learn to distance themselves from it is by spacing out to it. Like just zoning out, tuning out to what's actually happening. You know, and so this is why you see it even more nowadays than even before, because there's more addictions a child can have now than before, where they start to have little video games and watching telly and playing games outside with other kids, and they're doing all these things that the average parent thinks, oh, this is good. But the main reason why they're doing it is because they're avoiding the experience with their parents and using a lot of distraction, internal distraction and external distraction, food as well, distraction, but external distractions as well, you know, things that engage them. And whatever the parent will allow you to do is what you would have chosen to do. So in Mary's case, her parents really only allowed her to read books.
Yeah, I just read books. And then I'd get in trouble for reading books too much because I just read them voraciously my entire childhood. I figured out a system where I could read a book in the shower. I read a book at the dinner table. I in the car. At any minute that I could, I was reading a book. And it was my way of not being there, being somewhere else.
Yeah, I did that with just being in my fantasy, and I was called out on it a lot, like just going somewhere else.
Going
in
into
my
sort
mind.
of mystery world and fantasy world and like friends, imaginary friends. And
I don't really remember, but just being absent,
Yep.
like sucking on my thumb, and
Yeah.
I still zone out a lot today.
Yeah, that's right. So one of the first things you learn to do as a child is to zone out and use a method. Now, if whatever the method is allowed is the method you will first use, and also will be your primary method of avoiding your emotion right to this day, right? So if it happens to be books, for Mary it's been books, right to this day, she's still reading books to zone out, right?
I don't read many books anymore.
No.
But
when we first met, it was
I
like,
used to read them all the time.
she was buying books, reading books,
Any kind of
reading books. She's got a stack of books like beside her bed, like
Yep.
books everywhere, you know what I mean? And all just to zone out. For me, it was more doing things like the only thing I was probably allowed to do, well, I was allowed to be alone and I was allowed to go out on my own bushwalking and whatever. That was what I was allowed to do, right? So at a very young age, like I was 4 or 5, I'd be riding my push bike kilometres away from home. My mum and dad often didn't know where I was for a whole day, and I could be alone the whole day. So mine was being alone. That was my go-to, right? My way of avoiding my own stuff, yeah? And so I loved being alone. Mary wasn't allowed to be alone because they wanted to constantly force themselves close, hugging, like while at the same time smothering, but while at the same time not wanting her to be herself or feel herself. And so books was her allowed. So it was a big thing, right? Now, all of us usually have 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 allowed things that our parents allowed. And then beyond that, it was like not allowed. So like my parents bought a telly, and when I was little, like I was about 4 or 5, I think it was, they bought their first telly. It was a black and white thing. Back then, cartoons started at 6 a.m. So what do you reckon I was doing? 6 a.m. I actually put on the telly at about 5:40, just before 6 a.m, and there was the test pattern with a bit of music. Drove my parents nuts, right? And then from 6 a.m. to the time I went to school, I'm watching telly, right? My parents didn't agree with that, so they sold the telly. So from the time I was that age to 18, never saw a telly. So now that was stopped, but I could go out bushwalking. So that's what I did. I could also make a negotiation with my family about doing jobs for pay.
You could be industrious.
I was allowed to be industrious, in other words. So I made a negotiation with my mother that I would do the washing every week, I would do some ironing, I would clean the bathroom once a week, I would cook 3 days a week, right? And she let me, and I got paid for it.
But was it still to get away from the truth of
Correct.
the situation you were
So
in?
I learnt that working your guts out is a great way to avoid. So later on in my life, what do you reckon I did? Like I was a workaholic, worked my guts out to avoid my feelings. You know, up until the time I was 33, there were some times where I'd work 4 days straight without sleep, right? That's how much I would work, like 4 days. And and I would then drive home after 4 days straight without sleep, anywhere up to 800 kilometres after that as well. And I can remember like windows down, trying to keep cold so I could stay awake, and pulling over and having cups of coffee. Like, by this stage, 4 days, you're hyped up, right? It's like you're on drugs, right, by that stage. And this is what I did to avoid my feelings. But I was allowed to, you see. So when I started my businesses at home, you could say, when I was 5, I was allowed to have a business. So what do you reckon I did as soon as I got out of any education, which was electronics engineering? What do you reckon I did? Set up my own business. I wasn't one of these people who worked for somebody else for 40 years. I set up my own business because that was the thing I was allowed to do. Right?
Yeah, and for me, it was books and food.
Yep.
Food was allowed. Mum was always feeding us to suppress everything that was going on. So in my history, it was being an academic, like being studying and stuff, And I had issues with food, alcohol, cigarettes for a while, things that I was using to avoid the truth.
Which mum or dad allowed?
Yes, they weren't keen on the...
Dad was keen on the alcohol.
Yes, Dad liked it. He had a drinking buddy then,
Yeah.
but not very keen on the cigarettes. But Dad is a smoker. But what I'm thinking of for you, Charlotte, is like I was using those same techniques. So you've got this technique of I absent myself. I just go away. But I was using them into my adulthood, much like Jesus was, still to avoid the truth of what was happening in our lives. So for yourself, every time you're absenting yourself, even as an adult, you can know, I'm avoiding the truth of what's happening right now in my life.
Yeah.
Because that's obviously, it's like these addictions, the things we were allowed to do to avoid the truth. And letting go of those addictions is going to help you with this childhood as well as your adulthood.
Yeah. So everything you was allowed to do as an addiction, as a child, to get away from things, you now will do. And the problem is that it's so natural that you barely even think of doing it. It's like, it's just normal. It's just, this is what I do. And also you feel very attracted to it because it helps you avoid feelings, right? So the question you had is, how do I connect to my memories of my childhood, which are really associated with the feelings of your childhood, right? So to connect to a memory, so if you think of a memory is a sum total of not just thoughts, but it's emotions, experiences, smells, tastes. And the memory is a very interesting thing because it combines all of the experience as a picture and a visceral experience, in the sense that you can almost, if you have memory properly, you can almost feel the pain and where it was in your body when you broke your arm, or you can feel everything because it's not just thoughts at this stage. But there's all this stored stuff that's a part of the experience. So let's call your memory your experience, right? Which is really what your memory is, and your experience is made up of your thoughts, your emotions, your sensory, even your senses, like what you saw, what you heard, how you felt, who touched you and when they did. That's all a part of this experience, right? And a lot of our experiences as children are not very pleasant, right? So here we are, we've got this experience. So let's put that down there, which is not what you're not connecting to. So you're not connecting to this experience. And you can see that if you continue the same methods you used as a child to deny your experience, can you see it's going to be hard it's going to remain hard to connect to it, right? So the very first thing that must be done in order to connect to an experience is to start deconstructing the methods that you were allowed to use to detune from your experience. And that's a decision you'll need to make.
Yeah, I started doing that, so stop drinking alcohol and smoking cigarettes and smoking weed. I all did that in the last 10 years, but now it's the smaller things, like recently started giving up coffee.
Yeah.
And I think technology is a big one.
Big one too.
But
yes,
the biggest thing
see,
is...
now you're talking about grown-up Charlotte and
Yes.
what she did.
Yeah.
But what did little Charlotte do on top of that? See, she wasn't allowed to have drugs. She wasn't allowed to,
Have coffee.
have coffee or get drunk. See, these are adult things we choose to do to continue the suppression. But I'm talking about, what about little Charlotte?
I wonder what she did.
Well, you've told us.
You already told us
It's-
the main thing.
Yes, this going away, that's the biggest thing.
That drove you to drugs, that drove you to alcohol.
That
They're all
they'll
methods of
help
going
you
away.
to do it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is, if you can view that going away as, it's like, say I was sitting here, guys, and I was smoking a cigarette. And I was like, yeah, I want to connect to my feelings. And, it would be comical, wouldn't it? If I came in here and lit up a cigarette this morning, you'd be like, what is happening? Clearly
Where's
she's
Mary
avoiding.
gone?
Mary is not Mary. But it's like every time you do this thing where you go away, it's like you're smoking, it's like me smoking the cigarette. It's the thing that so all my things with alcohol and cigarettes were really related to the thing I was allowed to do, which was use my body to suppress, use a physical substance to suppress. It was all the food.
Started with food, of course.
It started with food, and I have problems with food. I still seek out food when I want to suppress something sometimes, depending on what that feeling is. So when you're doing this thing where you're like, oh, I've gone away, oh, I'm not paying attention, it's like you are eating chocolate or drinking coffee, or it's the same, except this is your biggest thing you did. And this is how you avoided connecting to the experience as a child.
Yeah, the desire to do the zone out has caused you to go to drugs, has caused you to go to alcohol, has caused you to even drink coffee, and it's caused you to get so involved in technology that you forget your life. It's the desire to zone out that causes these. You could say it's the cause as to why you did all those other things to harm yourself instead of feel your experience. Now, of course, as Mary said, while you're doing the thing, the zone out in your case, the childhood thing that you were allowed to do, while you're doing that, the experience will remain suppressed.
Yeah.
Because that's the purpose of the thing the child learnt to do, is to zone out the experience, right? So while you're doing it, the experience is not going to be fully remembered. You're not going to be able to recall it. You might have little glimpses of it occasionally, which I know you do, but you won't be able to recall the whole experience, right? And that was the purpose of the action taken by the child. The problem as an adult is you've got to reverse it in order to access the experience. If you can access the experience, now you can deal with the experience. But if you don't access the experience, how can you deal with it? You're not conscious of it, so how can you deal with it? So it's very important not to look at... See, the adult things are all good to list, like the drinking and the drugs and all that, and the technology and all that are good to list. But they're not the real thing you were allowed to do as a child generally. Although in this generation of children...
They have been, yeah.
They are the things, you understand? But for a generation like my generation, there was no such thing as a computer. There was no such thing as a mobile phone. There was no such... We weren't allowed to use those techniques because they didn't even exist then, right? Some of us got to use play as our method. You were always told, go out and play, go out and play, go out and play, and get away from me, go out and play. So instead of feeling the rejection of it all, you just go out and play. And it was a great way to avoid the rejection, right? Avoid the lack of interest, things like that. So we were taught, in my generation, taught different ways, but the youngest generation, like Emma's age, Elsa's age, is like your mobile phone, you got your screen in front of you, got your own personal screen. A lot of Western people have, right?
Sometimes they're even given drugs as a child now.
Yeah, speed.
Yeah.
Things like that. Yeah. Lots of spirit addiction in all of that too. So the poor little kids get more overcloaked with spirits as a result as well.
You said speed, didn't you? Yeah, sugar, yeah. But also children with ADHD are prescribed amphetamines.
Speed.
Yeah.
Amphetamines.
Yeah. I'm just clarifying what you're saying.
That's right. Yeah. Drugs there's drugs like just food drugs and that, that are used to suppress emotion, but there's also actual drugs that they're actually giving children now.
Antidepressants?
To help them detune from their feelings.
So you can see that as they grow into adults, they're going to have an entitlement to a whole heap of things to avoid.
You think you've got one? Yeah. Wait till this generation of children, particularly modern day children in the West, come. They're going to have, many people are saying, it's the children that are going to save the world's problems. That's not what I'm seeing. What I'm seeing is they have more problems than the average adult had when they were their age. So the average 5-year-old child now has more problems emotionally than the average adult had 40 years ago. So how are they going to solve problems? It's going to be very hard. Yep. So the key is to access this childhood allowed methods of denial of an experience, your memories.
And to develop a desire to give it up.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you'll find it's probably one of the hardest things to let go of. You need to pray about a fair bit, and it'll be quite hard because it's been your primary go-to, not since a teenager, but since a little.
Yeah, and also it's internal. I can't
Yes.
just
Correct.
avoid the substance.
Correct.
Correct.
So you can take away the substance, which I recommend people do, certainly. Take away the substance, take away all of that. But if you don't deal with the thing you were allowed to do as a child, you'll always revert to that. Yeah. And like I said, for many of you, it's more than one. And for some young people, it can be like 25 things that they're allowed to do, which makes it even more difficult to give up.
And this is something that we want to talk about this weekend, is like what is required to do to make these changes. It's quite painful when you can't remember your childhood experience. You feel pain and you think, how can I access what I need to access to let things go? But it feels even more, if you feel yourself, it feels pretty challenging to think about giving up this. This is what I do to manage. I just go away sometimes. I just step out of myself sometimes. It's like we each have these kind of treasured things, if you think about it, in our life that we think, if I don't have that thing, I can't even imagine. And these are the kind of things that are involved in developing humility, is developing the desire to give those things up. And you can't just do it cold turkey when they're internal like that. You have to have the desire to do it. Otherwise, you'll just do it. But these are the things
But you can
that,
pray for God's
Yes.
help to help you with the desire, can't you?
There's
You can
so
pray
much
for
help to
good
do it.
spirits to come and help you to
Yep.
have a desire as well.
Even remind you, oh, you're doing it, what don't you want
There
to
you go
be
again.
with
There you
now?
go again.
Yeah, yeah.
Having some. See, most of us get annoyed with that, but it's actually can be quite good.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah, can help a lot. But, all of someone in another place I was talking to them about this, and they're like, oh, so you're saying there's emotions about emotions. There's emotions I've got to deal with about having my emotions.
Yeah.
And there is, yeah. All these things that Jesus wrote up before about the things that happen to us in childhood, and then the way that we cope with avoiding those the potential violence and the shutdown and all of those things, they are things that we do have to deal with in order to, get on with releasing our experience.
Now, there's one thing more I must say in answer to your question before we break, and that is your faith at the moment is set in such a manner that you actually like to not remember.
Yeah.
Right? It troubles you in the sense of you're going, what am I not remembering? So that sort of troubles you. But then on the other hand, it's sort of the corrupt faith is saying, but what if I remember things that are bad? Like, what am I going to have to do then? Right? So a part of the problem we face in this dynamic is the reason why this child uses the effective technique is because the child also developed within itself a corrupt faith based on its need to use that technique. Do you understand what I mean by that? In order to use a technique, you have to agree with its usage internally. You have to desire its usage internally.
It's sort of like little Charlotte, oh, this is terrible. I don't know what's going on.
I can't
What
cope.
is true? Oh, I'm just going to step out of myself.
And
That
mum and dad are
works.
okay with that.
Yeah, Mum, I'm not getting in trouble for doing this.
Yeah.
Oh, then you develop the faith. This is a good thing to
This
do.
works.
This is effective for me.
This is good. It works. It gets me away from this bad situation. This works. This is fantastic. This is great. This is going to be what I'll use for the rest of my life. It's fantastic, is what is the internal feeling. So the desire becomes set to continue using it. And remember, desire is linked to faith. Desire is a sub-aspect of faith. And so that means that your faith has been corrupted now to the point where you're wanting to use it. So not only is there the thing itself that you use that you're going to have to address. There's also your desire to use it that you're going to have to address. Do you understand the difference? There's the thing you do, which is, in your case, zone out. Then there's your desire to zone out that's going to have to change, as well as the zone out itself. So the difficulty is going to be changing your desire to zone out rather than just stopping the zone out. It's sort of like if I'm a smoker, if you imagine I'm a smoker, I'm smoking my cigarette. Now I can stop the cigarettes, but if I don't address the reason why I needed them, can you see I'm just going to go and find another substitute for the cigarette, maybe candy, sweets, and use that as a way of zoning out, right? But if my desire is that I want to know why I'm going to the cigarettes, what does it give me? What am I looking for? And I actually feel that, now my desire to have a cigarette will dissipate, and therefore I won't use cigarettes, but I also won't use candy or I won't use sweets. You follow?
Yeah, but isn't the reason for the desire to zone out the experience itself?
No.
No.
Not always, no. No, it's not always the experience itself. It can be your method of thinking that you have some kind of control over your life. Your method of, this is something you want, right?
The justifications.
Yeah, it's like I'm desperate for some level of control over my experience, right? So there's the experience itself, and then there's your desperation for some level of control over it, which is driving your denial of the experience. You follow? Now, the method you use, which might be physical or emotional or even spiritual, there's some people who just go, I've reincarnated, so I don't have to deal with it now. I can deal with it next time around. Or, I deserve the life I've got. I don't really have to change it because in the past life I was, this is what some people in India feel. In the past life I was a terrible person, obviously, and this is why I'm being punished for this life. So I've just got to accept my punishment, right? Not complain about it. These are spiritual beliefs that often people imbibe to avoid the experience. And then there's emotional beliefs like, I shouldn't have to feel anything. I should be able to avoid my emotions from now on. I should be able to zone out. It's good for me to zone out. That's an emotional experience. Then there's sexual things you might do to zone out. I need to have more sex with people to make myself, have some connection to myself because I feel numb otherwise, and then you develop sexual addictions. And then there could be the physical one, like taking drugs, alcohol, all of those things. So there's all sorts of methods, but you've also got to find the faith you have that drives them all, which is not just, I want to not know it's not because of the experience, it's because I don't want to now know it either. So one thing is your experience, the next thing is wanting to remember it that needs to be addressed. That makes sense?
Maybe if I listen back to it, at the moment I feel clueless about that.
Yeah, you're just zoned out.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is your method of dealing with something when it gets too much for you. Yeah. And you sort of just, I'm gone, I can't even concentrate anymore on what's being said. Yeah? Very common method, by the way. I mean, many people use it.
It's quite important what we're saying there, that the justification with the faith is like a justification, if you like. It's saying, this is a good thing for my future. Zoning out is a good thing for my future. Now, if I was sitting here smoking a cigarette and saying, Charlotte, I had this experience, so smoking is a good thing for my future. You would say to me, Mary, that's not even
you're killing yourself,
logical.
like
you've had an experience and now you're smoking and you're saying that you should smoke forever because of the experience. You would say no. But inside of little Charlotte, she feels like, no, zoning out is the way that is justified because of this experience. And it's the justification that is an emotion in and of itself is what Jay's trying to help you see. And the experience is painful and you're feeling that I can't handle that pain or it's better not knowing that pain for you. is the justification for continuing the zoning out. And that better not knowing the pain emotion is the thing to shift. Then you'll access your experience. Yeah. Trying to access your experience while that justification of it's better not knowing and zoning out, it doesn't work, does it? You've tried. Yeah.
And of course, when you feel it's better not knowing, then of course you're going to be very attracted to using every addiction you can to not know. But the trouble is, you can come to a Divine Truth lecture and you hear, oh, my drug taking is not good for me, so I stopped drugs. Next Divine Truth lecture, oh, my drinking's not good for me, oh, so I stopped.
He even came for coffee and chocolate.
I even come for your coffee and your chocolate, and your toilet paper and everything, right? Like,
yeah, just emotion.
if you haven't heard that discussion, you need to listen to that one. But and the internal, once all of these external methods that you actually using as an adult are taken away from you, now you're pretty much left with the emotional methods you've used as a child that were never taken away from you, right? And the reason for their existence is still, I shouldn't have to feel the experience. Yeah. It's good for me to avoid the experience. That's the reason for their existence. So not only are you going to have to take away the addiction, but also the motivation for it to be a reason to avoid the experience has to be gone as well.
And my experience is I got really, really angry about that,
Yeah,
about giving up those
everybody
things.
does.
That's what I'm telling you. Because most people, when you come for those things, if you like, come for them. No, we're not really coming for them. It makes us sound very scary. Yeah. But when through your own sincerity, you're confronted with the fact that, I have to give up this precious habit or this justification for not feeling all my pain, I've been more angry about that than even experiencing some of my pain sometimes, accessing it sometimes. This idea that no, that part of me has to go emotionally if I'm going to keep growing, if I'm going to love, if I'm going to, be my personality, that's quite challenging for everybody.
And the reason why it's so challenging is because that's where most of your terror is.
Yeah.
And most people want to avoid terror like the plague, So the reality is the experience itself is usually nowhere near as bad as the terror you have of it, right? And that's where most of us face our main issue is we justify, through our terror, we justify avoiding the experience, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, it's time to have
Time to have
dinner
some lunch,
time.
hey?
Lunchtime,
Yeah.
I should say.